Hey guys, high above the mortal world, where the air grows thin and cold, Mount Olympus pierces the heavens like a marble blade. Here, in halls carved from starlight and dreams, the gods hold their eternal court. Golden light spills across polished floors, casting long shadows between towering columns. The scent of ambrosia hangs heavy in the air, mingling with the distant thunder of Zeus's voice. But tonight, something darker stirs within these sacred walls. The gods do not forget, and the gods do not forgive. For mortals who dare to reach beyond their station, who steal what belongs to the divine, who believe themselves clever enough to outwit immortal minds, there awaits a punishment that transcends death itself. 3 stories echo through the ages, 3 souls bound by chains that time cannot rust. A titan who loved too deeply, a king who thought himself too clever, and a mortal who forgot his place at the divine table. Before we begin, take a moment to tell me, where in the world are you listening from and what time is it right now? It's always fascinating to realise how many of us are here together, sharing this exact moment. And if you truly enjoy what we do here, feel free to subscribe. It really helps. Now, find a comfortable position. Let your body relax, your eyes gently close, and allow yourself to be fully immersed in the story that's about to unfold. Their crimes were different, but their fate remains the same. To suffer without end, to know that every dawn brings not hope, but the continuation of their torment. These are the punishments of the gods. He knew the light he gave to mankind would burn him forever. In the days before time learned to measure itself, when the world was young and the titans walked among the stars, there lived one whose heart beat not for power, but for compassion. Prometheus the forethinker, wisest of the titans, stood apart from his brethren who warred with Zeus. While others fought for dominion over sky and earth, he watched the small, struggling creatures that the gods had scattered across the world below. These first humans, fragile as morning frost, huddled in caves when darkness fell. Their breath formed clouds in the cold air, their eyes wide with fear at every shadow. They knew not fire, knew not warmth, knew not the light that could push back the endless night. Prometheus felt their suffering like a weight upon his chest. Each night, as they trembled in the darkness, as wild beasts prowled just beyond their sight, as the cold crept into their bones, his divine heart ached with a pain no god was meant to feel. They are more than animals, he whispered to the wind. They think, they dream. They love their children as fiercely as any god loves power. But Zeus had forbidden the gift of fire to mortals, declaring it too dangerous for such fragile beings. For countless seasons Prometheus watched, and waited, and wondered. The humans learned to use stone and bone, to weave grass into shelter, to speak words that carried meaning. But still they shivered in the dark, still they fled from every roaring beast. Then came the night when decision crystallized like ice in winter air. A human child, no more than 7 summers old, had wandered too far from the cave. Now she crouched beneath a towering oak, surrounded by the gleaming eyes of the wolves. Her mother's cries echoed through the valley, raw with terror and helpless love. The child's father stood at the cave mouth, holding only a sharpened stick, knowing he could not reach her in time. This was the moment when compassion became rebellion. No more, Prometheus breathed, and his words carried the weight of mountains. No more shall they suffer in darkness while the gods feast in light. He turned his gaze toward Olympus, toward the sacred forge where Hephaestus hammered dreams into reality. The decision was made. He would steal fire from the gods themselves, knowing full well the price that Zeus would demand. Some gifts are worth any punishment, some love burns brighter than any pain. And so began the theft that would echo through eternity. The night when a titan chose mortal tears over divine approval. when compassion became the greatest crime of all. The night wrapped around Olympus like black silk, soft and impenetrable. Prometheus moved through shadows that seemed to part before him, his immortal form blending with the darkness between starlight and stone. No wind stirred the sacred groves, no owl called from the cypress trees. Even the normally restless spirits of the mountain held their breath, as if sensing that something momentous hung in the air like morning mist, step by careful step. Prometheus climbed the marble stairs that led to Hephaestus' forge. Each footfall whispered against stone worn smooth by countless divine processions. Yet tonight, only one set of feet disturbed the sacred silence. The scent reached him first, that particular mixture of heated metal and divine flame that marked the god of the forge's domain. Then came the glow, warm and golden, spilling from the workshop where miracles took shape beneath immortal hands. Hephaestus slept. His massive frame sprawled across a bed of cooling coals that would have incinerated any mortal. His breathing came deep and steady, the rhythm of one whose labours had earned him rest. But his forge, his sacred forge, still burned with the eternal flame. Prometheus paused at the threshold, knowing that once he crossed this line, there could be no return. The fire before him was not merely flame, it was the essence of light itself, the power that separated gods from mortals. His hand trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of what he was about to unleash upon the world. Fire would bring warmth, but also war. Light, but also the shadow of knowledge, progress, and the pain that comes with growing beyond one's nature. Yet in his mind's eye, he saw the child beneath the oak, heard her mother's desperate cries, felt the cold that gnawed at human bones like hungry wolves. Some prices must be paid, some gifts must be given, regardless of the cost to the giver, with movements swift and silent as falling snow. Prometheus reached into the heart of the sacred flame. The fire did not burn him, for he was divine, but he felt its power singing through his very essence like liquid starlight. He cupped the flame in his palms, watching it dance and flicker with a life all its own. Such a small thing, this tongue of golden light, yet it held within itself the power to transform an entire world, the power to elevate or destroy. Behind him, Hephaestus stirred in his sleep, muttering words in the ancient tongue that only the eldest gods remembered. Prometheus froze, heart thundering like war drums, but the smith god merely turned and settled deeper into his bed of coals. The moment passed, and Prometheus exhaled a breath he hadn't realised he'd been holding. Now came the true test, carrying this divine flame down the mountain, down to the world of mortals who had never known its blessing. He moved like morning mist through the sleeping halls of Olympus, past chambers where gods dreamed of power and glory, past gardens where golden apples held the secret of immortality. None stirred, none suspected that in their midst walked the greatest thief in all creation. The mortal world lay spread below him like a dark tapestry, punctuated only by the faint glimmer of stars reflected in rivers and lakes. Somewhere in that vast darkness, humans huddled and waited for a dawn that would bring them light beyond measure. Prometheus descended, carrying in his hands not merely fire, but the future of an entire species. Each step took him further from the realm of gods, and closer to a destiny that would echo through every age to come. The night held its breath, as if the world itself knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Fire was coming to mankind, and with it, both salvation and the seeds of their eternal struggle against the dark. Dawn broke pale and uncertain over the mortal realm, casting long shadows across valleys where humans had learned to fear the coming of each new day. But this morning would be different, for descending through the mist came a figure bearing light itself. Prometheus found them where he knew he would, huddled in their cave like frightened animals, the child's mother still weeping tears that had not ceased through the long, terrible night. The wolves had taken her daughter, as they had taken so many others before. He approached slowly, his divine radiance dimmed to spare their mortal eyes, yet still they gasped and fell to their knees at his presence. "Do not fear," his voice rumbled like distant thunder, gentle yet commanding. "I bring you a gift." The flame in his hands pulsed with warmth, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls that had known only darkness since the world began. The humans stared, transfixed, as if witnessing the birth of a new star. "This is fire," Prometheus spoke, his words carrying weight beyond mere sound. "It will warm you when the cold seeks to claim your bones, light your way when darkness would lead you astray, and keep the beasts at bay when they circle with hungry eyes. With infinite care." He touched the divine flame to a pile of dry branches the humans had gathered but could never ignite. The fire spread like liquid gold, catching and growing, filling the cave with warmth that penetrated deeper than flesh and bone. The humans gasped as one, their faces illuminated not just by the light but by wonder itself. Children who had never seen flame pointed with trembling fingers. Elders wept at the beauty of it, and mothers drew their young closer to this miracle. "Guard this gift well," Prometheus warned, though his voice held no threat, only deep concern. "Share it freely among your kind. But remember always that it came from the realm of the gods. Fire is power, and power must be wielded with wisdom." The eldest among them, a woman whose hair had turned white as mountain snow, stepped forward on shaking legs. "Great One," she whispered, "how can we ever repay such a gift?" Prometheus smiled, knowing the answer would break his heart. "Live," he said simply. "Grow, learn, love your children and teach them to love theirs. Build cities where once you cowered, create beauty where once there was only survival. That is payment enough for any god." As the sun climbed higher, Prometheus began his journey back to Olympus, leaving behind the first flame that mortals had ever tended. Behind him, smoke rose like prayers into the morning sky, carrying with it the scent of burning wood and budding hope. But even as he walked, he felt the first stirrings of unease in the divine realm above. The other gods were waking, and soon, very soon, they would notice what was missing from Hephaestus's forge. The theft had been perfect, but discovery was inevitable. High above, Zeus stirred from his golden slumber, his eyes opening like twin suns as a disturbance in the cosmic order tickled the edges of his consciousness. Something was different. Something had changed in the careful balance he maintained between divine and mortal realms. The king of gods rose from his bed, his massive frame casting shadows that seemed to reach across the very heavens. Power crackled around him like visible electricity, and in the distance, carried on the morning wind, came the faint but unmistakable scent of burning wood. His nostrils flared, his eyes narrowed to burning slits, and thunder began to gather in his chest like a caged storm. "Fire!" he whispered, and the single word carried such rage that eagles fled from their mountain perches. Mortal fire! The discovery had come, and with it, the fury of the heavens themselves. Prometheus had given mankind the greatest gift imaginable, but the price, the terrible price, was yet to be paid. The rage of Zeus, when it finally broke, was like the shattering of the world itself. Lightning crashed through the halls of Olympus, marble columns trembled, and the very air turned electric with divine wrath that had been building since the first spark touched mortal wood. "Prometheus!" His voice boomed across creation, rolling like thunder through every realm, reaching down to the deepest caves where mortals huddled around their stolen fire. Birds fell silent, winds ceased their whispers, and even the fates paused in their weaving. The Titan heard his name carried on that terrible wind, and knew his time of reckoning had come. He did not run, did not hide, but stood at the edge of the mortal world with shoulders squared and eyes fixed upon the storm-dark peaks of Olympus. "I knew this moment would come," he whispered to the wind. "I chose it, freely, and with full knowledge of the price." Behind him, far below, the first human fires sent smoke curling toward heaven, prayers made visible, hope made manifest. Zeus appeared before him in a form that hurt to look upon, wreathed in lightning, crowned with storm clouds, his eyes blazing with the fury of 1,000 tempests. "You have betrayed the natural order," the king of gods thundered. "Fire belongs to the divine realm alone." "I have given compassion form," Prometheus replied, his voice steady despite the cosmic rage before him. "Nothing more, nothing less. They suffered in darkness while we feasted in light. The balance was already broken." Zeus's expression darkened further, if such a thing were possible. "Your compassion," Zeus spat the word like poison, "has doomed them all. Fire will bring them war, destruction, the very tools of their own extinction. You have not saved them. You have cursed them." "Perhaps," Prometheus admitted, his gaze drifting to the distant smoke of human hearths. "But they will face that future with warmth in their bones, light in their eyes, and the knowledge that at least one immortal thought them worthy of such a gift." "That must be enough." Zeus raised his hand, and from the sky came chains of adamant, unbreakable links forged in the heart of dying stars. Then you will watch them use your gift to destroy each other, and know that every death, every war, every tear shed in firelight is your doing. The chains wrapped around Prometheus like living serpents, binding his wrists, his ankles, his chest. He did not struggle, did not cry out, but accepted his fate with the dignity of one who had chosen love over safety. "I regret nothing," he gasped. "We shall see," Zeus replied, and with a gesture that shook the foundations of the earth, he transported the bound Titan to the most desolate place in all creation, the Caucasus Mountains, where wind howled like the voices of the damned, and no living thing had ever set foot here, on a jagged peak that pierced the sky like a black tooth. Zeus had Prometheus chained to the living rock, iron spikes driven through immortal flesh, binding him so tightly that he could not move, could not escape, could barely breathe. "But chains alone," Zeus murmured, his voice carrying the promise of unending cruelty, "are not sufficient punishment for such treachery." From the depths of Tartarus, he summoned forth a creature born of divine vengeance, an eagle whose eyes burned with immortal hunger. The great bird settled on the rocks above Prometheus, its wings casting shadows that seemed to swallow light itself. Its talons, sharp as starlight, gleamed with anticipation. "Every day," Zeus commanded, "so you will feast upon his liver. Every night it will grow back, forever." As the first dawn broke over the Caucasus, the eagle descended. Prometheus watched its approach with eyes that held no fear, only profound sadness. He had known this moment would come, had accepted it, but knowing and experiencing were different kinds of agony. And so began the eternal torment of the Firebringer, the Titan who loved too well. Far below, in valleys warmed by stolen flame, humans told stories of the god who suffered for their sake, never knowing that his screams echoed through the mountain passes, a symphony of sacrifice that would play until the end of time. Years passed like drops of blood from an immortal wound, each dawn bringing fresh agony, each sunset offering no respite. The eagle had grown fat on divine flesh, its beak stained crimson, its eyes bright with the satisfaction of endless feeding. Prometheus no longer counted the days, for time had lost all meaning when measured in heartbeats of pain. The chains had worn grooves in the living rock, polished smooth by his struggles during those first terrible months. Now he hung motionless, conserving what little strength remained, yet still, when the wind was right, he could smell the smoke of human fires drifting up from the valleys below. Wood smoke, cooking fires, the forge flame of metal workers who had learned to shape bronze and iron. His gift had taken root and grown beyond his wildest dreams. They had built cities now. These mortals he had blessed with fire, great walls of stone, temples that reached toward heaven, marketplaces where voices carried the laughter of children who had never known the cold terror of absolute darkness. This knowledge sustained him, even as the eagle's talons found their mark once more. "Do you regret it now?" Zeus's voice came on the mountain wind, cold and mocking. The king of gods appeared intermittently, drawn by some perverse fascination with his prisoner's endurance. "Do you see what your precious mortals have become?" Below them, far in the distance, the smoke of battle mingled with that of hearth fires. For Zeus spoke truth. Humans had indeed learned to use fire as a weapon. Bronze spears heated in flame, arrows tipped with burning pitch, siege engines that hurled blazing destruction across besieged walls. "I see them learning," Prometheus whispered, his voice hoarse from countless screams. "Growing, becoming more than they were. Yes, they fight, but they also create. They love, they build, they dream of tomorrow." That was always the price of progress. Zeus's expression darkened, for he could not deny the truth in those words. The mortals had indeed become something magnificent, something that approached the divine in their capacity for both creation and destruction. "Your compassion," he said slowly, "may have been wiser than my caution. But the punishment stands," the king of gods continued, his voice hardening once more. "You defied the cosmic order, stole what was mine to give or withhold. That transgression cannot be forgiven, regardless of the outcome." Prometheus nodded slowly, understanding at last the true nature of his torment. It was not merely punishment for theft, but a reminder to all immortals that even the noblest intentions could not justify disobedience to divine will. He was both martyr and warning, forever suspended between heaven and earth. The seasons turned and turned again. Snow fell upon the Caucasus peaks, melted in spring warmth, gave way to summer heat that offered no relief from his eternal bondage. Through it all, the eagle came with the dawn, reliable as sunrise, hungry as time itself. Yet sometimes, in the deep of winter nights when even the eagle sought shelter, Prometheus allowed himself to remember the wonder in human eyes when they first saw flame dance, the joy of children who no longer feared the dark, the mother who wept grateful tears, knowing her young ones would be warm. Those memories burned brighter than any flame, warmer than any fire he had ever stolen from the gods. They sustained him when flesh failed, comforted him when hope seemed extinguished, reminded him why some prices are worth paying, no matter how long the payment lasts. And so the Firebringer endures, chained to his mountain, visited by his tormentor, sustained by the knowledge that somewhere below, mortal fires still burn. The gift lives on, even as the giver suffers for his generosity. The flames he brought to mankind flicker in every hearth, dance in every forge, warm every home where love dwells. His pain purchased their light, his sacrifice secured their future, and though the gods remember everything, some thefts are worth eternal punishment. But this is only the first of our tales of divine retribution. For on distant shores, in the marble halls of Corinth, another soul was learning that cleverness, when turned against the gods, carries a price beyond mortal comprehension. He cheated death twice. In the prosperous city of Corinth, where merchants counted their gold beneath marble porticos and ships heavy with cargo crowded the harbour, there ruled a king whose wit was sharper than any blade ever forged. Sisyphus, son of Aeolus, master of the windswept citadel that commanded the narrow isthmus between two seas. His palace rose like a crown above the city, its towers catching the morning sun, its halls echoing with the laughter of a man who believed himself cleverer than fate itself. Handsome as Apollo, cunning as Hermes, and proud beyond all measure of mortal restraint. Sisyphus had built his kingdom through a combination of shrewd trading, strategic marriages, and a willingness to deceive anyone, mortal or divine, who stood between him and his desires. The merchants loved him, for his policies filled their coffers with silver. The citizens praised him, for his rule brought prosperity to their houses. But the gods had begun to notice that King Sisyphus showed them less reverence than a mortal should. His first great transgression came on a day when Zeus, in the form of a magnificent eagle, descended to carry away the river nymph Aegina to a distant island. Most mortals would have averted their eyes from such divine business, but Sisyphus watched and remembered and saw opportunity where others saw only awe. When Aegina's father, the river god Asopus, came searching for his daughter, his waters boiling with parental rage, Sisyphus stepped forward with a smile that promised secrets for the right price. "I saw her taken," he said smoothly, "but such knowledge has value." "Name your price," Asopus thundered, his voice like rushing rapids over stone. Sisyphus gestured toward his citadel, toward the dusty hills that surrounded it. "My city thirsts. Great one, give us a spring of fresh water, and I will tell you who stole your precious daughter." The bargain was struck, and from the living rock beneath Corinth's highest tower, sweet water bubbled forth like liquid silver. In return, Sisyphus revealed the truth that Zeus himself had claimed Aegina, carrying her away to father a hero upon her divine flesh. Asopus roared his fury, launching himself skyward in pursuit of the king of gods, his watery form crackling with lightning-bright rage, and Sisyphus, watching from his tower, laughed at the chaos he had sown, never dreaming that Zeus had heard every word. The wrath of Zeus, when it fell upon Corinth, came not with thunderbolts or earthquakes, but with a visitor whose presence made the very air grow cold. Death himself, Thanatos, stepped from shadow into the king's throne room like winter made manifest. "Sisyphus of Corinth," the dark god intoned, his voice like the final breath of dying men, "your time has come. You have meddled in divine affairs once too often, and Zeus has decreed that you must answer for your presumption in the realm of Hades. But where other mortals would have wept, would have begged, would have accepted their fate with whatever dignity they could muster, Sisyphus smiled, that same calculating smile that had served him so well in life, now turned upon death himself like a weapon honed to perfection. "Welcome, great Thanatos," he said, rising from his throne with the grace of a born performer. "Your reputation precedes you, as does your efficiency. Tell me, is it true that no mortal has ever escaped your grasp once you have laid hands upon them?" Death's hooded head tilted slightly, perhaps in pride, perhaps in suspicion. "None have ever tried," he replied, "for all know the futility of such attempts. I am inevitable, absolute, final, as you shall learn." "Fascinating," Sisyphus murmured, circling the dark figure like a merchant examining precious goods. "But surely, a being of such power, such cosmic importance, carries tools befitting his station, the chains that bind souls to their fate. Where do you keep such magnificent instruments?" And there, in that moment of vanity, Death made his first and final mistake. He produced the adamantine chains, the same unbreakable bonds that had held Prometheus to his mountain, letting them gleam in the torchlight like captured starfire. Behold, the fetters of fate itself. "May I examine them more closely?" Sisyphus asked. his voice carrying the perfect note of scholarly curiosity mixed with mortal awe. It is not often that a humble king is granted such insight into the workings of divine justice. Death, flattered by this unexpected reverence, stepped closer. "They are beautiful," the king whispered, reaching out as if to touch the chains with trembling fingers. "Forged in the heart of creation itself, unbreakable as the will of the fates." His voice dropped to barely a murmur. "But tell me, how exactly do they work?" Thanatos, unused to such fascination with his tools, began to demonstrate. "The chains respond to divine will," he explained, wrapping one end around his own wrist to show their flexibility. "They bind not just flesh, but soul itself, making escape impossible even in death." "Remarkable," Sisyphus breathed, and then, with movements swift as striking lightning, he lunged forward and clasped the other end of the chain around Death's remaining wrist. "But do they work on their wielder as well?" The adamantine bonds, created to be absolute, responded to their nature rather than their intended target. They tightened, locked, sealed with divine finality around the wrists of Death himself. Thanatos stared in shock, then fury, then growing horror as he realized what had occurred. You cannot," Death stammered, pulling against bonds that had never known defeat, but the chains held firm, for they recognized only one law, absolute binding, regardless of who wore them. "This is impossible." "Nothing is impossible to a mind willing to think beyond convention," Sisyphus replied, his earlier deference replaced by triumphant satisfaction. "You came to claim my life, but instead you have given me something far more valuable, time itself." With Death chained in the deepest dungeon of his palace, Sisyphus had achieved what no mortal had ever dreamed possible. He had captured the ending of all things, trapped finality itself in adamantine bonds, and in doing so, had broken the fundamental order of existence. Days passed, then weeks, and a strange stillness settled over the world. In battlefields where warriors fell pierced by bronze spears, they did not die. In sick beds where fever burned through mortal frames, the afflicted suffered, but could not find release in Death's embrace. Old men, their bodies worn to brittle bone and failing flesh, continued to breathe long past their appointed time. Babes born with twisted limbs that should have claimed them, lingered in agony that had no end. The world, without Death, had become a place of endless suffering. Hades, lord of the underworld, felt the cessation like a wound in his very being. No new souls arrived at the river Styx, no coins were placed on dead men's eyes, no prayers rose from funeral pyres. His realm, built upon the certainty of mortal ending, had become an echoing emptiness. "Where is Thanatos?" the god of the dead demanded, his voice shaking the very foundations of his obsidian palace. His servants, the lesser spirits of ending, lie cowered before his wrath, but none could answer, for none knew what mortal cleverness had wrought. It was Hermes, swift-footed messenger of the gods, who finally traced the disturbance to its source. Flying on winged sandals over the Isthmus of Corinth, he felt the wrongness like a poison in the air, and knew that only one mortal possessed the audacity for such cosmic meddling. He found Sisyphus in his throne room, feet propped upon a golden footstool, wine cup in hand, looking for all the world like a man enjoying the greatest joke ever told. "Sisyphus of Corinth," Hermes said, his voice carrying divine authority. "What have you done?" "I have improved upon the design of existence," the king replied cheerfully, taking a long sip of his wine. Death was inefficient, final, lacking in flexibility. Now mortals can truly live without fear of arbitrary ending. "You have broken the cosmic order," Hermes thundered, his usually jovial demeanour replaced by righteous fury. "Release Thanatos immediately, or face the combined wrath of all Olympus." But Sisyphus merely smiled, that same calculating expression that had served him so well and so poorly. The wrath of Olympus, Sisyphus mused, swirling the wine in his cup like liquid gold. How terrifying that sounds. But tell me, swift Hermes, what power do the gods hold over a man who has conquered death itself? His eyes gleamed with the dangerous light of absolute confidence. Hermes stepped closer, his caduceus crackling with divine energy, his winged sandals stirring the air with barely contained power. "You fool," he whispered. "Do you think death is the only force at our command? There are fates worse than dying. Sisyphus of Corinth." "Are there?" the king asked, genuinely curious, as if discussing the weather rather than divine retribution. "I find that most threats lose their sting when examined closely. Death was supposed to be inevitable, yet here we are." He gestured toward the dungeon below, chatting while inevitability rots in chains. But even as he spoke, Sisyphus felt the first tremor of unease. The wine in his cup had begun to taste bitter. The golden light streaming through his windows seemed somehow colder, and in the distance, he could hear something that made his blood run cold. Screaming, not the cries of battle or the wails of grief, but the endless, hopeless screaming of those who could not die, could not escape, could only suffer without the mercy of oblivion to grant them peace. The sound rose from every corner of his kingdom, from the houses where the sick lay trapped in fever dreams, from the battlefields where warriors writhed with mortal wounds that would not heal, from the very streets where old men collapsed but could not surrender their burden of breath. "Do you hear that?" Hermes asked softly, his anger replaced by something far more terrible, divine pity mixed with inexorable justice. "That is the sound of your gift to humanity, the blessing of a world without death." For the first time, Sisyphus felt doubt creep into his heart like winter frost. He had been so proud of his cleverness, so certain of his triumph, that he had never considered the full implications of his victory. A world without death was not paradise. It was the deepest hell imaginable. "They beg for release," Hermes continued, his voice growing stronger as the lesson took hold. "Your own subjects, the people you claim to protect, pray to gods they can barely remember for the gift of ending. You have not saved them. You have damned them to eternal torment." The wine cup slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the marble floor like the king's certainty. Red wine spread across white stone like spilled blood, and in that crimson pool, Sisyphus saw the reflection of his own hubris. I never meant..." "Intent matters little when weighed against consequence," Hermes replied with divine finality. "Release Thanatos, return death to the world, and perhaps, your punishment will be less than absolute. Refuse, and watch your kingdom become a monument to suffering." Sisyphus closed his eyes, listening to the screams that rose from his city like incense burned in reverse. Prayers for ending rather than blessing. His greatest triumph had become his greatest failure, his cleverness transformed into the cruelest folly. What must I do?" "Go to your dungeon," Hermes commanded, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic law. "Release the chains you forged through deception, and accept whatever justice the gods deem fitting for one who would unmake the fundamental order of existence." The journey to the dungeon felt like walking through a nightmare made manifest. Each step echoed with the cries of his suffering people. Each breath tasted of the despair he had inadvertently created. At the iron door, Sisyphus paused, hand trembling on the key. Inside, Thanatos waited in adamantine bonds, his dark eyes burning with fury that had only grown stronger during his imprisonment. "Come to gloat, mortal?" Death asked, his voice like the whisper of wind through graveyards. "Come to savour your victory over the inevitable?" "No," Sisyphus whispered, his voice breaking like a child's. "I have come to beg forgiveness, and to undo what should never have been done." With hands that shook like autumn leaves, he reached for the chains that had seemed such a triumph only hours before. The adamantine bonds fell away like melting ice, and death rose with terrible majesty, stretching limbs that had been bound too long. Your apology, mortal, is noted, but insufficient. Justice demands payment for this cosmic disruption, and payment you shall provide. Death's touch, when it finally came, was gentle as a lover's caress, yet final as the closing of a tomb. Sisyphus felt his life drain away like water through cupped hands, his clever mind growing dim, his proud heart stuttering to its inevitable end. But this was only the beginning of his punishment. His spirit descended through layers of earth and shadow, past the roots of ancient trees, past the bones of forgotten kings, until he stood before the black waters of the river Styx, here, where all souls must pass. The ferryman Charon waited with eyes like cold stars. 2 coins for passage, the ancient boatman intoned, his voice like rusted metal scraping stone. But Sisyphus, even in death, had prepared for this moment. "I have no coins," he said smoothly, "for I was taken before proper burial rites could be performed." The lie came as easily as breathing once had. Charon's ancient eyes narrowed, but the law was absolute. No soul could cross without proper funeral preparations. "Return then," he growled, "when your body has been given its due honours," and with those words, Sisyphus felt himself pulled back toward the world of the living. He awoke in his own tomb, gasping like a drowning man who suddenly finds air. The marble sarcophagus felt cold against his skin, but his heart beat strong and warm in his chest. Once again, his cleverness had cheated death, but this time he knew it could not last. For days, he lived as a man reborn, walking his kingdom like a ghost made flesh, watching his people die peaceful deaths now that Thanatos roamed free once more. But every shadow seemed to reach for him. Every whisper of wind carried the promise of reckoning. The gods would not be fooled twice. Hermes came for him on the 7th day, appearing in the throne room with divine authority crackling around him like visible lightning. "Sisyphus of Corinth," he declared, "your deceptions end now. You will return to Hades willingly, or be dragged there in chains of your own making." This time, there was no clever argument, no desperate stratagem, no brilliant deception to deploy. Sisyphus had used his greatest weapons, and they had proven insufficient against the patience of immortal justice. "I understand," he said quietly. "I am ready." But Hades, Lord of the Dead, had prepared a special welcome for the king who had twice cheated death. In the deepest pit of Tartarus, where the worst offenders against divine law served their eternal sentences, waited a punishment tailored to the very essence of Sisyphus's crime. A boulder, massive beyond mortal comprehension, carved from the living stone of the underworld itself. Its surface was smooth as polished marble, yet heavy as the weight of all mortal sins combined, and beside it, a slope that stretched upward toward a summit that seemed to touch the very roof of Hades. "Behold your eternity," Hades pronounced, his voice echoing through the caverns like distant thunder. "You sought to delay the inevitable, to cheat the natural order through endless cleverness. Now you shall perform an endless task, one that requires no thought, only eternal labour. Push this stone to the summit," the god continued, "and when you reach the top, you may rest. But know this, the boulder will roll back down, and you must begin again, forever. Your cleverness is useless here. Only strength and endurance matter, and both will fail you, again and again." Sisyphus approached the stone, placing his hands against its cold surface. It felt solid, immovable, like trying to push against the foundations of the world itself. But he had no choice, and so, with a grunt of effort that echoed through the depths, he began to push. The first step was agony. his muscles screaming in protest as the massive stone grudgingly shifted. The second was worse, as he realised the true weight of his burden. By the 100th step, sweat poured from his brow like tears, and the summit seemed no closer than when he had begun. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time had no meaning in this place of eternal punishment. His shoulders burned, his back ached with a pain that seemed to reach into his very soul, yet still he pushed. For what else could he do? This was his existence now, this struggle, this endless, futile climb, and then, impossibly, miraculously, he reached the summit. The boulder balanced precariously on the edge, and for one perfect moment, Sisyphus allowed himself to believe that perhaps this torment had an end. But the gods, as always, had the final word. The stone, as if possessed by malevolent will, tilted, teetered, and began its inevitable descent. Sisyphus watched in helpless horror as his entire effort, his pain, his struggle, rolled away from him like water down a drain, and from far below, the boulder called, waiting for him to begin, again. The descent was swift, merciless, inevitable. The boulder crashed down the slope like thunder-made stone, bouncing off jagged rocks, gathering speed with each terrible impact, until it came to rest exactly where it had begun. And there, at the bottom, it waited with the patience of eternity itself. Sisyphus stood at the summit, alone, his hands still burning from the rough stone, his chest heaving with exhaustion that seemed to reach into his very bones. The silence that followed was more terrible than any scream, for it held within it the promise of endless repetition. He looked down at his tormentor, that mass of stone that had already become the centre of his universe. There was no avoiding it, no clever scheme that could free him, no deception that would work twice against divine justice. Only the long, agonising descent back to the beginning. Each step downward felt like walking backwards through his own life, past the moment of his death, past his clever schemes, past the arrogance that had brought him to this place. His feet found the familiar grooves worn into the stone, paths that countless other souls had walked before him. When he reached the boulder, it seemed larger than before, heavier, more impossible. Perhaps this was part of the punishment, that each attempt would feel harder than the last, that hope would die by degrees rather than all at once. He placed his bleeding hands against the stone and began again. The second climb was agony beyond description. His muscles, already strained to breaking, protested with every movement. His breath came in ragged gasps that echoed through the caverns like the death rattles of forgotten gods. Yet still, he pushed. For what else remained to him? Somewhere above, he could hear the laughter of lesser demons, spirits who found amusement in his eternal struggle. Their voices carried on the stagnant air, mocking, cruel, reminding him that his torment was entertainment for those who had never known the weight of divine displeasure. Hours crawled by like wounded animals, each minute stretched into seeming eternity by the constant strain, the endless pressure, the growing certainty that this moment would be his existence forever. No rest, no relief, no hope of anything beyond this stone and this slope and this suffering. Yet again, through will alone, through the stubborn refusal to surrender that had once made him a king, he reached the summit. The boulder balanced, teetered, and once more, with casual malevolence, began its descent. The pattern was established, unbreakable as the chains that had once bound death. Days became weeks, weeks became years, years became centuries. The rhythm of his punishment became as natural as breathing once had been. Push, strain, climb, reach the top, watch it fall, descend, begin again. an endless cycle that wore grooves not just in stone, but in his immortal soul, sometimes in the deepest moments of despair. Sisyphus would pause and remember his former life, the taste of wine, the warmth of sunlight on marble, the satisfaction of a clever plan perfectly executed. But these memories, once sweet, now tasted bitter as ashes in his mouth. For what was cleverness without freedom? What was intelligence without the ability to choose? His greatest gift, his sharp mind, had been rendered useless by the simple brutality of endless labour. The gods had found the perfect punishment, one that turned his strength against itself. Other souls passed by sometimes, spirits being led to their own eternal fates, and they would pause to watch the king who had twice cheated death reduced to this mindless, endless, pushing. Some pitied him, others felt superior, but all learned the same lesson. The gods do not forget. The gods do not forgive. And those who rise too high, who reach too far, who believe themselves cleverer than divine, will find that eternity is a very long time indeed to contemplate their hubris. Sisyphus learned this truth with each step, with each push, with each fall. And still even now, millennia after his first step upon this cursed slope, the king of Corinth continues his labour. The boulder rolls down, he walks down, places his hands upon the stone, and begins the climb anew, forever and forever and forevermore. But in the depths of Tartarus, where screams echo like prayers and despair hangs thick as morning mist, another tale of divine retribution was already written in starlight and shadow. For there was once a mortal favoured above all others, who forgot that even the highest honour can become the deepest shame. At the table of the gods nothing remains hidden. In the distant realm of Sisyphus, where golden wheat swayed beneath azure skies, there ruled a king whose fortune exceeded that of mortal princes, yet whose hunger would prove bottomless as the void itself. Tantalus, son of Zeus himself, born of divine blood, yet cursed with mortal flesh. His palace rose from marble quarries that seemed inexhaustible. His treasuries overflowed with gold that caught sunlight like captured fire. But wealth, true wealth, lay not in earthly riches, but in the privilege granted to no other mortal. He alone among humanity was welcomed at the table of the gods. While other kings offered prayers from distant altars, Tantalus dined with immortals, tasting ambrosia that granted eternal life, sipping nectar that flowed like liquid starlight. The gods found him amusing, this half-mortal who carried their blood in his veins. Zeus smiled upon his son, Hera tolerated his presence with divine patience, and even stern Apollo found entertainment in the king's quick wit and clever tongue. For a time, Tantalus basked in this impossible honour, believing himself truly blessed above all mortals who had ever drawn breath. But privilege, when it flows too freely, becomes poison in the soul. Each feast made Tantalus hungrier, not for food, but for secrets. Each conversation with immortals filled him with questions that gnawed at his mind like hungry wolves. What mysteries did the gods hide from mortal eyes? He began to listen not as a grateful guest, but as a spy among his hosts. Divine whispers of fate's designs, discussions of mortals' destinies, plans for floods and famines and the rise of heroes. Knowledge flowed around him like wine, and like wine it made him drunk with possibility. Why should mortals stumble blind through their brief lives, he asked himself during the long nights between divine summons. Why should they suffer when the gods could ease their pain with but a word? Compassion, or was it arrogance, began to poison his gratitude. The first transgression was subtle, almost accidental. A vial of ambrosia, forgotten perhaps, left beside his cup at feast's end. He slipped it beneath his robes, carried it back to the mortal realm, and watched his servants taste immortality. They did not transcend their nature, they merely sickened and died. But failure only fed his hunger for understanding. If divine food would not work, perhaps divine secrets would. He began to share what he had heard, whispers of Zeus's plans, rumours of Hera's jealousies, warnings of Apollo's wrath, and for a time mortals called him the wisest of kings. Yet even this was not enough. The gods still spoke in riddles, still held back their deepest truths, still treated him as a favoured Pete rather than an equal. His divine blood sang in his veins, demanding recognition, demanding respect, demanding proof of his worthiness. The idea when it came to him arrived like lightning splitting the night sky. If the gods claimed omniscience, if they boasted of knowing all things, then surely they could pass a simple test. A test that would prove once and forever whether their wisdom was true or merely divine arrogance. His son Pelops, beautiful as spring morning, beloved, beyond all earthly treasures, played in the palace gardens, while his father watched with eyes grown cold as winter stone. "Forgive me," Tantalus whispered, though whether to the boy or to the gods even he could not say. The knife fell swift and merciless, ending innocence with the practical efficiency of a butcher preparing meat for market. But this was no market, and this meat was destined for the most terrible table ever set. If the gods were truly all-knowing, they would refuse this feast. In the palace kitchens, where servants had prepared countless meals for divine guests, Tantalus worked alone. His hands stained with his son's blood, carved and seasoned and prepared the most abominable dish ever conceived. Yet his face remained calm, almost serene, as if preparing any ordinary feast. When the gods arrived for their customary feast, they found their host more gracious than ever, his smile wider, his welcome warmer. Golden plates gleamed in torchlight, wine flowed like rivers of ruby, and the scent of roasted meat filled the air. "My lords and ladies," Tantalus said, "tonight I offer you something special." The gods reclined upon their couches, divine forms draped in silk that shimmered like captured moonbeams, their immortal faces bright with anticipation of mortal hospitality. None suspected, none imagined that their host had prepared for them the ultimate test and the ultimate blasphemy. The first course was served with ceremonial grandeur platters of golden fruit that gleamed like small sun's bread that smelled of wheat fields, blessed by divine favour wine that sang with the voices of 1,000 harvests. But these were merely preparations for what was to come. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, reached for a pomegranate with fingers that had coaxed life from barren soil. But as her hand neared the fruit, she paused, her divine senses detecting something that made her immortal blood run cold. "This meat," she whispered, "what manner of creature?" One by one the gods fell silent. Apollo's golden face grew pale as winter snow, Artemis's silver eyes widened with dawning horror, and Zeus, mighty Zeus, slowly set down his cup with hands that trembled with barely contained rage. They knew, all of them knew what abomination lay before them. Only Demeter. Zeus spoke his voice like distant thunder rolling across mountains. Only she in her grief for lost Persephone was distracted enough to taste. His eyes fixed upon Tantalus with the weight of infinite condemnation. "But we know what you have done." Tantalus stood frozen, his test revealed as the monstrous failure it had always been. The gods had not been fooled, had not been deceived, had seen through his deception from the first bite. Only divine mercy had prevented them from consuming the flesh of innocence. But mercy, he now realized, had limits. "Your son," Hera said, her voice sharp as shattered glass, "your own child served to us like common meat at market." The goddess rose, her divine form crackling with righteous fury. "You thought to test our wisdom, but have only revealed the depths of your own madness." Athena, goddess of wisdom, spoke with the cold precision of absolute judgment. The theft of ambrosia, the betrayal of our secrets, these were crimes we might have forgiven. But this, she gestured at the abominable feast. This transcends mortal sin, this is sacrilege beyond redemption. "Please," Tantalus whispered, his voice breaking like a child's, all his pride, all his cleverness stripped away by the weight of what he had done. "I only wanted, I thought, if you truly knew all things." The words died in his throat, for even he could not justify the unjustifiable. Zeus rose, and when he stood, the very foundations of the palace trembled. Lightning played around his form like living jewellery. thunder rolled in his chest like caged storms seeking release. "You wanted to test divine knowledge?" he roared. "Then learn this truth. Consequences are eternal." With a gesture that shook the pillars of heaven, Zeus reached into the realm of the dead, pulled forth the scattered pieces of innocent Pelops, and with divine power that mocked mortal understanding made the child whole again. Life flowed back into lifeless flesh, breath into still lungs. But Demeter in her distraction and grief had consumed one shoulder of the boy, and even divine power could not restore what had passed into immortal flesh. In its place Zeus forged a shoulder of ivory white, as mountain snow, perfect as carved moonlight, yet forever marking the cost of his father's sin. "Your son lives," Zeus declared, his voice carrying both mercy and condemnation. "But you, Tantalus of Sisyphus, you have forfeited not just your place at our table, but your right to peace, to satisfaction, to the simple blessing of fulfillment. Your hunger shall be eternal as your crime." The world dissolved around Tantalus like morning mist before the sun palace walls, crumbling golden treasures turning to dust, divine guests vanishing like dreams at dawn. And those who rise too high, who reach too far, who believe themselves cleverer than divine will, find that eternity is a very long time indeed to contemplate their hubris. Sisyphus learned this truth with each step, with each push, with each fall, and still, even now, millennia after his first step upon this cursed slope, the king of Corinth continues his labour. The boulder rolls down, he walks down, places his hands upon the stone, and begins the climb anew, forever, and forever, and forevermore. But in the depths of Tartarus, where screams echo like prayers and despair hangs thick as morning mist, another tale of divine retribution was already written in starlight and shadow, for there was once a mortal, favoured above all others, who forgot that even the highest honour can become the deepest shame. At the table of the gods, nothing remains hidden. In the distant realm of Sisyphus, where golden wheat swayed beneath azure skies, there ruled a king whose fortune exceeded that of mortal princes, yet whose hunger would prove bottomless as the void itself. Tantalus, son of Zeus himself, born of divine blood, yet cursed with mortal flesh. His palace rose from marble quarries that seemed inexhaustible. His treasuries overflowed with gold that caught sunlight like captured fire. But wealth, true wealth, lay not in earthly riches, but in the privilege granted to no other mortal. He alone among humanity was welcomed at the table of the gods. While other kings offered prayers from distant altars, Tantalus dined with immortals, tasting ambrosia that granted eternal life, sipping nectar that flowed like liquid starlight. The gods found him amusing, this half-mortal who carried their blood in his veins. Zeus smiled upon his son. Hera tolerated his presence with divine patience, and even stern Apollo found entertainment in the king's quick wit and clever tongue. For a time, Tantalus basked in this impossible honour, believing himself truly blessed above all mortals who had ever drawn breath. But privilege, when it flows too freely, so becomes poison in the soul. Each feast made Tantalus hungrier, not for food, but for secrets. Each conversation with immortals filled him with questions that gnawed at his mind like hungry wolves. What mysteries did the gods hide from mortal eyes? He began to listen, not as a grateful guest, but as a spy among his hosts. Divine whispers of fate's designs, discussions of mortals' destinies, plans for floods and famines and the rise of heroes. Knowledge flowed around him like wine, and like wine, it made him drunk with possibility. Why should mortals stumble blind through their brief lives? He asked himself during the long nights between divine summons. Why should they suffer when the gods could ease their pain with but a word? Compassion, or was it arrogance, began to poison his gratitude. The first transgression was subtle, almost accidental. a vial of ambrosia, forgotten perhaps, left beside his cup at feast's end. He slipped it beneath his robes, carried it back to the mortal realm, and watched his servants taste immortality. They did not transcend their nature, they merely sickened and died. But failure only fed his hunger for understanding. If divine food would not work, perhaps divine secrets would. He began to share what he had heard, whispers of Zeus's plans, rumours of Hera's jealousies, warnings of Apollo's wrath, and for a time, mortals called him the wisest of kings. Yet even this was not enough. The gods still spoke in riddles, still held back their deepest truths, still treated him as a favoured pet rather than an equal. His divine blood sang in his veins, demanding recognition, demanding respect, demanding proof of his worthiness. The idea, when it came to him, arrived like lightning splitting the night sky. If the gods claimed omniscience, if they boasted of knowing all things, then surely they could pass a simple test, a test that would prove, once and forever, whether their wisdom was true or merely divine arrogance. His son Pelops, beautiful as spring morning, beloved beyond all earthly treasures, played in the palace gardens while his father watched with eyes grown cold as winter stone. Remember Tantalus, mortals would say, in ages yet to come, remember the king who had everything and lost it all through wanting more. His name would echo through time, a whisper of caution, a prayer against the hunger that consumes. Some prices are paid not just by the sinner, but by all who come after. And in that timeless place of perfect punishment, where water meets lips but never passes them, where fruit hangs ripe but never falls, Tantalus continues his eternal reach. A reminder that at the table of the gods nothing remains hidden, and everything has its price. But our journey through these halls of divine retribution draws near its end. 3 tales we have told, 3 souls we have witnessed in their eternal torment, 3 lessons written in suffering that spans the ages. The fire-bringer, the death-cheater, and the host who forgot his place. High above the mortal realm, where marble columns catch the last light of dying stars, Mount Olympus stands eternal in its majesty. Yet tonight the halls of the gods echo not with laughter, but with the weight of justice serve the satisfaction of divine will made manifest. Zeus sits upon his throne of polished obsidian lightning, playing idly between his fingers like captured starfire. His eyes, ancient beyond mortal comprehension, gaze down upon the world where 3 torments play out their eternal dramas. The firebringer chained to his mountain, the king pushing his stone, the host reaching for what he can never claim. Do they understand now? Hera asks, her voice carrying the crystalline clarity of perfect judgment. These mortals who thought themselves so clever, so worthy of divine favour, do they comprehend the weight of their presumption? Understanding comes slowly to those blinded by their own pride. Zeus replies, his voice like distant thunder rolling across eternity. But time, endless time, has a way of teaching lessons that momentary pain cannot. They will learn, as all must learn, that hubris carries its own reward. In the depths of Tartarus, Prometheus feels the eagle's talons find their mark once more, yet still his eyes turn toward the valleys below, where mortal fires burn bright against the darkness. His sacrifice continues to bear fruit, even as his flesh bears eternal wounds. Some gifts he knows are worth any price. On his endless slope, Sisyphus places bleeding hands against familiar stone, beginning another climb that will end in futility, yet somehow finding in that very futility a strange kind of peace. For he has learned at last that cleverness, when turned against the cosmic order, becomes the cruelest foolishness. And in his place of perfect punishment, Tantalus reaches once more for fruit that sways beyond his grasp, his throat burning with thirst that water will not quench. Each movement is a prayer, each failure a lesson, each moment a reminder that divine hospitality once lost is lost forever. These three, bound by chains more absolute than adamant, united in suffering that spans millennia, serve as eternal testimony to a truth that mortals forget at their peril. The gods remember everything, forgive nothing, and repay arrogance with interest that compounds through the ages. Their crimes were different, their punishments unique, yet their lesson remains the same. Whether driven by compassion, cleverness, or hunger, for more than mortals should possess those who reach beyond their station, find that the fall is always longer than the climb. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance marking time that has no meaning for those caught in divine justice. Seasons pass, empires rise and fall, heroes are born and die, yet still the three continue their appointed tasks, for immortal punishment like immortal memory knows no end. And in the halls of Olympus, where ambrosia flows and laughter echoes through chambers of gold and light, the gods prepare new tales of wrath and retribution. For mortals, it seems, never learn the lessons written in their predecessors' blood. Pride, like fire, spreads from heart to heart, generation to generation. "Tell me, my queen," Zeus murmurs to Hera, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy, "what new transgressions stir in the world below? What fresh presumption dares to challenge divine will?" His smile holds no warmth, only the promise of justice yet to come. Hera's eyes gleam with anticipation, for she above all others knows the price of mortal arrogance, especially when it touches upon the sanctity of divine marriage. "There is a hero," she says slowly, "beloved of your heart, whose mother dared to claim your favour. Perhaps it is time for another lesson." The king of gods nods slowly, his expression darkening like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. "Yes," he whispers, and his words carry the promise of tempests yet to come, of trials that will test heroic blood, of wrath that will span the breadth of the mortal world. Let the stories continue. For in the realm of the immortals, where memory is eternal and justice absolute, there are always new tales to tell, new punishments to craft, new lessons to write in the suffering of those who forget their place. The wrath of Hera stirs, and with it destinies yet unborn tremble on the edge of fate. But that is a story for another night, when shadows grow long and the fire burns low and mortal ears once again hunger for the eternal truths written in divine retribution. For now let the three continue their endless dance, and let their suffering serve as beacon and warning to all who would challenge the gods. Sleep now comes gently to those who have witnessed divine justice in all its terrible glory. The flames of mortal hearths flicker lower, casting dancing shadows that seem to whisper of ancient crimes and eternal punishments, while in the realm of the gods new storms gather on horizons yet unseen. The fire that Prometheus stole still burns in every forge, every lamp, every heart that dares to hope against the darkness. His chains may bind his flesh, but his gift lives on, a testament to love that transcends punishment, sacrifice that outlasts suffering itself. The boulder that Sisyphus pushes has worn smooth the very stone of Tartarus, yet still he climbs, still he strives a monument to the futility of challenging fate, yet also to the stubborn refusal of the human spirit to surrender, even in the face of impossibility. And the water that mocks Tantalus' thirst reflects not just his face, but the faces of all who have reached too far, wanted too much, forgotten, that even the greatest privilege can become the deepest curse. His reflection serves as mirror to mortal ambition itself. These tales flow through the night like rivers, seeking the sea, carrying with them the weight of eternal truths, the burden of divine memory, and the promise that justice, however delayed, however terrible, always finds its mark. Let sleep take you now, gentle listener, and dream of fires that warm without burning, of stones that rest without rolling, of tables where hospitality flows freely without price or punishment. For in dreams even the gods show mercy, but when you wake, remember these lessons written in starlight and shadow, in chains and stone and endless water. Remember that the gods watch and remember and repay every deed, good or ill, with interest that compounds through eternity. Until next we meet in the realm of stories yet untold, The wrath of Hera awaits with tales of heroic blood tested by divine jealousy of strength that must prove itself against impossible odds of love that dares to challenge the very foundations of Olympus itself. But that fire burns for another evening, another voice, another journey into the myths that shape our dreams. Rest now and let the eternal punishments of the gods fade into the gentle darkness of mortal sleep, where even the mightiest suffering becomes but whisper but shadow, but the fading echo of stories that will endure long after the last star burns cold. Sweet dreams, and remember the gods are always watching. In the silence that follows, where echoes of ancient torment fade like morning mist, the cosmos holds its breath. For somewhere in the mortal realm a child cries with lungs that will one day challenge the very heavens, and his mother, beautiful Alcmene, does not yet know the price her son will pay for divine blood. Hera's eyes burn with the cold fire of 1,000 jealousies, each one sharper than the last, each one hungering for satisfaction that only suffering can bring. This child, she whispers, her voice carrying the promise of storms, this bastard son of my husband's wandering eye, shall know what it means to bear the burden of divine hatred. Zeus shifts upon his throne, lightning flickering uncertainly around his fingers, for even the king of gods knows that his queen's wrath, once awakened, follows paths that twist and turn through decades, through lifetimes, through destinies yet unwritten. The boy is innocent. He ventures though his words carry little conviction. Innocent. Hera's laughter rings like shattered crystal through the halls of Olympus, beautiful and terrible and sharp enough to draw blood from the very air itself. Was his conception innocent? Was his birth innocent? Is his existence not itself a mockery of divine marriage? Her rage builds like pressure in a sealed vessel seeking release. He will be strong, Zeus says quietly, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy he cannot change, only witness. Stronger than mortal men, blessed with divine heritage that flows in his veins like liquid fire. The immortals will call him Hero. Hero? Hera spits the word like poison, her divine form crackling with an energy that makes the very stars tremble in their courses. Then let him earn that title. Let him purchase it with sweat and blood and tears beyond mortal measure. If he would be called hero, let him prove it through trials that would break lesser men. She rises from her golden throne, her movements fluid as water yet purposeful as falling stone, and in her eyes burns the light of plans taking shape, schemes that will span years, decades, a lifetime of testing. 12 labours. She breathes 12 impossible tasks, each one designed to humble divine pride. The very air grows thick with divine intention, heavy with the weight of fate being woven into new patterns, old grievances given form and purpose. Even Prometheus, chained to his distant mountain, feels the cosmic order shift, sensing that his sacrifice for mortal freedom will soon bear fruit in ways he never imagined. A lion whose hide cannot be pierced, a hydra whose heads multiply with each wound, a boar whose fury shakes the very mountains, these and more shall test the strength you claim runs in his veins. Hera's voice grows stronger with each word, feeding on its own momentum, building toward crescendo. Zeus watches his queen with eyes that hold both admiration and concern, for he knows that Hera's jealousy, when given purpose, becomes a force of nature as unstoppable as earthquake or flood. And if he succeeds, he asks, though perhaps he already knows the answer. If he succeeds... Hera pauses, her smile carrying depths that would drown mortal understanding. Then perhaps he will have earned the right to call himself son of Zeus, but success, my beloved husband, is not guaranteed. Heroes, like all mortals, can break. The hall falls silent once more, but this time the quiet thrums with anticipation, with plans set in motion that will reshape the mortal world, with the promise of legend being born from divine spite and heroic struggle. The wrath of Hera has found its target, and the target sleeps peacefully in his cradle unaware. Far below, in the city of Thebes, where mortals go about their daily lives, unaware that gods plot their futures, the child stirs in his sleep, tiny fists clenched as if already preparing to grasp the labours that await him. His name whispered by divine lips carries the weight of destiny itself. Heracles, Zeus speaks the name aloud, and in that speaking seals the fate of the greatest hero the world will ever know. A name that will echo through ages, through legend, through the very foundations of what mortals believe about courage, strength, and the price of divine blood. But that tale, the tale of the hero who would prove that even divine wrath can be conquered through strength of heart and will, that story waits for another evening, another fire, another voice to carry its weight through the darkness. For now, the wrath is kindled, and kindling is enough. Sleep comes now to those who have witnessed the birth of legend, the forging of heroic destiny in the fires of divine jealousy, and in their dreams they may hear the distant echo of labours yet to come, of strength yet to be tested, of love that endures even the wrath of gods. Until we meet again in the realm of heroes and the trials that make them immortal.